Everybody, and welcome
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, August 30th regular meeting of the Planning Commission. And could you take the roll, please?
Chair Suma.
Present?
Vice Chair Chang.
Present.
Commissioner Aiken. Commissioner Hackman.
Present.
Commissioner Liu.
Present.
Commissioner Regdal.
Present.
Commissioner Templeton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. I did want to bring it to Ms. Klicheva. This screen isn't working. The big jumbotron. Thank you so much. Okay, so we will move on with public comment, which is a time, this is a time if you want to speak to something that's not on the agenda. Do we have any speakers?
Yes,
I think we have one in the room.
I have received one speaker card from Mark Weiss.
Thank you.
Chair, could you remind me the time? Is it 3 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for your service. Commissioner Heckman, Commissioner Aiken, Commissioner Templeton, Chair Doria Suma, congratulations, my first time at your meeting. I am speaking about something that was actually at City Council recently and was on consent, and it wasn't pulled from consent, and I was a little bit disappointed, but I decided I'm not just registering formally my concern and my dissent, and I call it the moat, but people call it the fountain, and I decided it's not a moot moat. I think it's time to actually step up and try to intervene. And so I'm calling on the planning commissioners, including our ones in television land, to intervene. And the issue I'm concerned with is that we have decided to spend $400,000 to fix the fountain at Litton Plaza. And it's a very long story. I took the liberty of writing about a 500-word essay on this topic. I sent it to the planning.commission at the city. I sent drafts of it to City Council and Ed Chicata's office. And I've been following this quite avidly. I produce a concert series at Litton Plaza as a private citizen, exercising my basically First Amendment rights of freedom of assembly. And I've spoken on this matter at least 20 times on various boards and commissions. And I'm going to take a line from my former Grateful Dead buddy, Michael McFall, who is head of the Freeman Spogli Institute. But when I met him in 1982, he and I went to the Grateful Dead with our respective lady friends. And I don't really keep in touch with him, but he uses a line called bluff, which means bottom line up front. So I'm going to skip down to the bottom. But in an America seeming to teeter on the distinction between might makes right and a republic if we can keep it, Palo Alto should debate thoroughly and shake well before serving symbols of power or speech. Now, it sounds very esoteric, I admit, but there's a long history of Litton Plaza at the corner of Emerson and University as a gathering place, a commons. In 1970 or 68 through 71, especially Palo Altans and Stanford students protested the Vietnam War there. Peter Dreckmeyer, who became mayor of Palo Alto, some of you may have met, still involved in the environmental movement. In the early 90s, Earth Day was planned at or near Litton Plaza, although it took place at Stanford. In 2010, it was renovated, and it's still, to me, controversial and a sore spot how and why it was renovated. And I just feel it's one person, one vote, and not $1, one vote. And I feel that the taxpayers have yielded control to a group of billionaire landlords and developers whose names, conveniently enough, if we want to engage with them about what is democracy, their names are actually on a plaque. And so rather than we, the people, spending another $400,000 on their agenda of the moat versus a fountain, the moat is designed to stifle dissent and keep protesters 50 feet from that corner. I do not want to spend more money on the moat. If anything, some good citizen could put up, their own money for the moat. In fact, I will pledge $300 of my money, but not the taxpayers' money, towards if one of those billionaires pays for the moat himself or herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Do we have any other speakers?
No more speaker cards or raised hands.
Thank you so much. So we will go on to any agenda changes, additions, or deletions.
No changes.
Thank you. And then any city official reports to share?
Yes, so we had a quiet month in July with the council out, ramping back up. We have quite a few items going in September to council that will be representing the Planning Commission, Bart Heckman, and Commissioner Heckman will be asked to represent on September 5th. The Sobrado project is coming, 340 Portage is coming to council. And then on 9/11, we have a quarterly ADU report. We have a pre-screening that has not been seen by the Planning Commission, just a matter of interest. And then we have the permanent parklets ordinance. So we did visit with the Planning and Transportation Commission on the parklets where it touches Title 18 over the summer. That was, I think, June 28th was item 3 on that date. So Commissioner Heckman, if you would like, I can send you out some minutes. That's quite a few.
All right, thank you.
Links to minutes. And then we are coming to you the later, let's see, September 13th, we're coming to you with an action item, housing element implementation ordinance. It's kind of a handful anytime we get into zoning code amendments. And it may be converted to a study session or at least a part 1 of a part 1 and 2 because there's a bit of information there. So we're working towards that in real time to get you, and we're trying to meet our timely packets on Wednesdays now. So a bit more work on that. So, and that's
Okay.
all.
Thank you for that. Thank you for working on the packets. I know what a big ask it is. Is there any other staff are there any other staff members that would like to report out anything? I don't think so. I see Raphael.
I just wanted to, hi, Rafael Rios, senior engineer with the Office of Transportation. Just a really minor update for the Middlefield Lincoln effort that we're working on. We've met with a few residents that are in the immediate area of that intersection, and we're planning to move forward in the very near future with some improvements to the sight line, striping, and some signage. But the longer term discussion of what to do at that intersection will likely come to this committee this fall. So just want to give you guys a heads up on that progress. Other than that, I don't have too many other updates or any other updates at this time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any questions? Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for that update, Mr. Ruiz. I wanted to follow up on a question Commissioner Rectal asked last time about the El Camino repaving project that Caltrans is doing in our city that's being coordinated with the utilities department, I believe. Do we know, and are we able to provide any statistics about the any effects of the pavement deterioration on our safety? Do we get reports about roads that we don't own, like El Camino, or crossing those roads in our safety concerns?
Not specific to the pavement conditions. I'm sorry, I don't know the detailed answers to the statistics questions. I did try to inquire a little bit more about the status of that project, the repaving effort that will be coming. But sorry, I can't answer. I don't know the answer. to your-
No, I don't
um,
expect you to answer it now. I was just wondering if those statistics are available so that I
Sure.
could ask for them for next time. The reason is school just started back up. And as you know, in Palo Alto, many of our students bike to school and in quite a few schools. So I noticed in both directions in El Camino, students are biking across El Camino at Los Robles / East Meadow Way, which is incredibly deteriorated and super dangerous. And last year, I witnessed a collision there as well. And I just want to encourage you, if this data is available, I bet it would be really meaningful to the state agencies that are coordinating that. I know our department isn't, but that
You're
might be
referring
something
to
we can do.
the statistics of the number of students riding to school? Or,
No, if there was an uptick in collisions, I think it'd be valuable information because that's what Commissioner Rechdel was mentioning is concerning, is that
Yeah.
this area is more dangerous. And I personally can tell you, I walk it every morning to get my son to school. It's really dangerous. Like I'm concerned as well, and I see dozens of kids biking in the minutes that I'm there, but I know hundreds, so kids that go into Fletcher, kids go into Gunn, kids go into JLS, and so forth. So I think I know that we as a city and a Department of Transportation coordinate with the Bike to School program. And I just want to make sure that if there was some anomaly related to those crossings, and we saw an uptick if we did see an uptick in dangerous occurrences, that you guys would let us know.
I mean,
And let our partners at Caltrans know.
sure. Our transportation planners, they are working on the citywide, safe streets evaluation. But I can say, like even that, the data we look at, we don't, unfortunately, we don't get a lot of the data until months or even sometimes years down the road to develop a pattern, to see the fluctuations even monthly. So
I bet if the Department of Transportation had asked the police chief, can you let us know if these things are happening? Because it's back to school and we want to know if there's any imminent dangers. I bet there would be some interagency cooperation, interdepartmental cooperation. So I'm just planting that seed. I don't want to take any more time on this, but just wanted to emphasize that I appreciated Commissioner Ragdoll's question. I think this is an area that we show concern about at every PTC meeting. Thank you.
that's me, understood, and we'll look into
Yes, Commissioner Rectal?
Yeah, to echo that, we've been requesting for quite a while. Could we get just some stats about how many bike and pedestrian collisions that we have? We don't have to have great detail if that's hard to get, but I don't know, was there 10 last month or were there none last month? I have no idea what kind of collision experiences we're having in the city. So that'd be really good if we can somehow get a monthly report that would give us some idea what's going on.
Okay, well, I'll put in another request to our police department. I mean, I know they're going through a transition right now to upgrade their database system, but even our department's really been having a difficult time getting collision data. And even if when we do, there's several month backlog. I mean, just active investigations and things don't get into the database officially until, so a couple months down the road. But we understand what you're asking for. I'll coordinate with our safe routes to school to see if they have any kind of statistics that can be shared and such. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one more.
Thank
I
you.
realized I didn't scroll down to my list of things.
Thank you.
We do have some important news, and that is over the summer in July, we submitted an application for a new PDA, and we're calling it BASA, Bayshore Alma San Antonio Priority Development Area. Now, it was let's get the application in, then we'll go to council. And the target date is September 18th for council, but we would like to come on the 13th to go over that and share in a study session what we're up to there. They put out these deadlines, the MTC, ABAG, and we strive to meet those and not miss an opportunity, because associated with all the priority development areas is grant funding down the road. So we'll give a report and a study session to let you know about that. But it is already scheduled for September 18th council, because we have to have a resolution turned around for us not to lose the opportunity.
Oh, okay, so it will come to us after council
We can do
or before? do you
I
think?
was thinking to come on the 13th as
Okay,
a study session so that you're all in the know.
okay, great. Thank you very
Mhm.
much.
Sure.
Go ahead, Commissioner Templeton.
This reminds me, did you already share with the commission about the funding application for the rail crossings update? I read about it, but I hadn't heard through this channel yet.
I haven't shared anything. If you know something, you can share it with the group.
Well, I'm asking possibly the Department of Transportation, who did similar situation, applied for a grant. We now have grant money that is required to be spent on the train crossings. Mr. Ruiz,
Yeah.
would you give us an update on that, please?
Apologize. I don't have an update at this time for that. I'm gonna follow up with our rail coordinator or project manager, Ripon. I will try to get that update for you to, I wasn't provided an update if that funding was received or not.
Thank you. It was reported in the paper, so that might be an article we could just share. We could ask Ms. Klicheva or someone to share with the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any. So we will go on to our action items, which is a recommendation to the City Council regarding proposed amendments to Palo Alto Municipal Codes Titles 18 and 9 to facilitate the installation of electrification equipment for residential development. But before we start, and I'm sure staff has a presentation, I did want to address a late submission that was emailed to us today at 3, which how my colleagues would like to handle it, because I know that it's great that our hardworking staff is always updating things and getting things out, but 3 o'clock on the same day of meeting doesn't seem sufficient time to evaluate substantive changes. So my inclination would be that we ignore it, and but I'm not sure how my colleagues are feeling, and I know that not all the commissioners even had time to read it before they got here. I didn't see it till about 4:30 even, because I was doing other things and didn't see it. So any thoughts on that from my colleagues?
I suspect staff will be able to guide us through the changes from the material that was originally in the packet. My subjective impression is that there were really not very many, but if that's incorrect, then I leave that explanation up to you.
So I think Director Late maybe is here to facilitate or add to that discussion. And so, yeah, I am expecting staff to explain it. I did look at the At Places memo. It looks like there are really 3 changes. 2 are simplifications, and then 1 changes to a table for clarity, which is, I think it's just adding greater or equal to signs. So that's pretty minor. And like Commissioner Aiken, I'm hopeful that we can absorb, staff can explain why they made these changes, and we can absorb them and act on them tonight as part of a recommendation.
Commissioner Templeton?
Yes, I'd like to just echo the chair's concerns here. I have school-age children, and so I was picking them up and dropping them off and getting them ready before I come here, and it's just not enough time to read these things. I would like the other commissioners appreciate if you walk us through these changes, but just wanted to ask you in the future to be mindful of the timing, because we do need more time for those things. Thank you.
Commissioner Chang?
I didn't literally was moving my son into his college dorm all the way right up until this meeting. So I wasn't aware that there was a memo. So as long as we can just walk us through what the memo said, then I'd be comfortable with it. But I wasn't aware that there was a memo or an email. Wasn't near a computer, wasn't looking at anything until just now.
Okay, it sounds like most of my colleagues would like to consider these. I'm not gonna have my voice be more important than our collective voice, but I do think it's also important to note that the public didn't see this at all. And, 72 hours is the law. I think in the future, I will be more firm and I won't want to accept things that aren't submitted at least before noon the day before. So everybody has a little time. We also have 3 commissioners in different time zones. And so it just gets to be too much. But so why don't we go ahead, since the majority of my colleagues would like to consider the last minute submission and include it with a pretty big, a good explanation of what the changes mean, because at least 2 commissioners didn't even read it. So that being said, I think we should go ahead and get the presentation first.
Thank you. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. I do have with me today John Late, our Director, as well as Michael Till, who is, I believe, online. I haven't checked, but he is supporting us as the expert in these matters, which, it's a pretty esoteric subject. So we originally had this report out for the August 9th. It got continued to this date. And so we're taking it up as the only item today. And just to say that we do have here as our recommendation to recommend this to council, adopt this draft ordinance amending Title 18 and Chapter 910 to facilitate the electrification equipment in residential neighborhoods. So this ordinance, which you have and have had for some time, does have the changes the Planning and Transportation Commission recommended back in December of 2022. So we really want to get those to the council, and we're putting with those these other changes. That is the reason we haven't taken it to council, is we needed to spend time on this noise aspect. So these adjustments are included in that double underline and double strike through text. So moving on, I love this image. So this is all in the effort to remove barriers to electrification in the city. And so with that, we looked hard at our noise ordinance as well as Title 18 to see if we could make it a little easier to get these installed. We have a pilot program happening and we're supporting the utilities department in that effort. So back in June, council did adopt the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which had this piece about locating anywhere on site this noise producing equipment that's serving ADUs exclusively. And so this was already adopted by council. This is just an overview of that December ordinance. On December 14th, the Planning Commission recommended these things, which was allowing encroachments into front yards and the other things noted here. And so moving on, trying to address noise producing equipment within setbacks is what we're after. So we had a couple of approaches that were identified back then, and we were concerned about the placement and the cumulative noise, as well as the fact that if we were to require noise reports of every citizen that came in and wanted to put in electrification equipment, it would cause delays. And so we were seeking a kind of a presumed compliance approach. We reached out for consultants' assistance, and that is Michael here tonight with us, and identified some solutions for this presumed compliance approach. Other cities were looked at. You can see here surrounding cities that had these noise standards for nighttime. And so we were, but our existing noise ordinance says that the noise levels cannot be more than 6 decibels above the local ambient at any point outside the property plane. And so we have, several areas in town that are 50 dBA at night. There might be some quieter areas up in the hills. So we started putting together a presumed compliance approach that would set the local ambient levels as 40 and 50. So, and we were looking at the equipment and what was typical as far as the noise that they generated. So we came up with this table that was, again, this presumed compliance. And I'm sorry for this image here, but the ordinance that came out today that people haven't seen was simply to, in the orange here, to note less than or equal to, and in the, this was the change, these parentheticals here, less than or equal to dBA, and then here was greater than or equal to this number of feet. So that's what's in the ordinance at places. What's here below is something that we had our consultant take a look at, because the ordinance in your packet and in today's staff report continues this, shows a 4-foot setback. And we were looking for what happens at 3 feet. What could you have at 3 feet as far as decibels? So this table, our consultant will go over with you. So that's one of the things to discuss. The other thing to discuss that was in the today's changes was the elimination of this little I here. Little I was about talking about 8 dB above. So there was a conversation about, maybe we can have some more wiggle room to get 8 dB above, but it got a little confusing because then we had the table and it was confusing us. And so we said, let's dispense with that. It's not needed. So that's what that was, to scratch that out. And then this third piece, which is the home improvement exception, we had proposed this new home improvement exception limit. We have 15 items in that home improvement exception list that could be considered. And so we have this item 16, which was in the report before, but we've scratched out this section again that talks about this 8 decibels. This thing that says 8 decibels above. So that was the intent of the ordinance to the staff report today, was to explain that perhaps briefly, but we do have our consultant here today. I'll note that this chart here, if you look at the PowerPoint, this used to say at 4 feet, the maximum allowable sound pressure level for equipment would be 43 dBA. The revised chart showing at 3 feet, the maximum allowable sound pressure level for equipment would be 39 dBA. And this is in the section of to meet the 40 dBA limit. Something similar for that to meet the 50 dBA limit at the property line. At 3 feet, it's 49 dBA. So that's basically the changes that happened. Again, overview, we're looking to amend noise ordinance chapter 910, section 910030. And I have some other slides here about utility incentives if anyone has questions, but that's basically what we're doing tonight, is focus on the noise ordinance modification, this presumed compliance table, and ask questions of our expert consultant who is here to answer the hard questions. Thanks. And
Thank
John,
you.
do you want to add anything? No. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Were your comments just about the outplaces memo? Or was this presentation comprehensive for the?
Oh, if it didn't feel comprehensive, I can,
No, I'm just trying to understand. It's just a
Yeah.
question.
okay.
What were you just explaining?
I was explaining the lead up to this, why we're here, and I was explaining
So the
what the
packet.
changes were. That's the changes I was explaining just now of
Yeah,
today's packet.
That was the stuff that was at places.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Commissioner Chang? Is she speaking?
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for explaining what the At Places memo included. That was very helpful. I think I got it, and those changes made sense to me and would have been questions I would have asked. Things that would have been areas that I would have asked about. So I think it actually eliminates some questions that I had. I did have one question about the change that we are making to the ambient noise. So if I look at my packet pages are different because I didn't receive the hard copy of the new packet, and it's really hard to toggle. I didn't receive the hard copy of the new packet, and it's hard for me to toggle back and forth between Zoom and the soft copy. But if I look at page 8 of 10, or page 8 to 9 of 10 of the handout, if that makes sense. So there's both the packet page number as well as the page number at the bottom.
Packet page 15, if that helps.
Yeah, 15 and 16, I think. So in the discussion section, it talks about the kind of discussion items. So discussion item 2 talks about raising the local ambient noise level in PAMC chapter 9.10 to a minimum of 50 for the flats and 40 for the foothills. And so that's raised from what? In other words, what was it in the code? What is it in the code right now?
Well, the code doesn't specify what the ambient noise level is. We do have a chart in the comprehensive plan that looks at different areas of the city. For instance, next to El Camino Real, we have a 70 and 70, I guess, CNEL. That would be very much noisier. And then a quieter area in the foothills, which, they say birds are about 50 something, 55. There's a chart in our comprehensive plan, and I could pull it up as a slide, if that would help.
Okay, so then is it more accurate to say that it's not so much that we're raising the local ambient noise level as noted in chapter 9.10, but that we're changing the approach from one where at least we're changing the approach for these types of equipment from where we're prohibiting things from being more than 6 decibels above ambient to prohibiting things to be above 50 or 40 dBA, depending on the area. Like we're changing the approach. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Yes, Commissioner Chang, that's exactly right. The word raise is probably not the proper way to describe this. The ambient noise is what it is. What we're trying to do here is, again, for this type of noise producing equipment, and with the real sort of focus on heat pumps, is define a level of ambient noise that if your noise producing equipment measured against that established number is within those thresholds, you're presumed to be compliant with our noise ordinance. And this is intended to be a way to help facilitate the installation of this type of equipment and not require noise studies or things like that.
Right, understood. So there's no need for any individual homeowner to go out and determine what ambient noise is at that homeowner's property. They can just figure out where they are in the map, whether they're in the 50 dBA range, 50 dBA area or the 40 dBA area, and then look at a table and then figure out what they need to do.
That's
Is that-
exactly correct. Yes.
Okay, got it. And so then the 50 dBA and 40 dBA was kind of determined based on benchmarking against other municipalities. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think our own local observations over time too. I mean, the hills tend to be a lot quieter. Tend to be quieter roughly than the flats.
Okay, well, regarding our own local observations, obviously the hills are quieter than the flats, but do we have other kind of local observation data points in terms of the actual DBAs, or was it just kind of looking at what was in the slides, the consultant slides, kind of, like what Sunnyvale and Menlo Park, or do we have other data?
Amy, Ms. French is looking at the comp plan map now,
Okay.
which I believe has some data on that.
Yes, I realize I should have put a slide together, but I am looking at, I can share my screen to show you what I'm looking at. In our comprehensive plan, it's CNEL, which is a weighted average. It's a little bit different than local ambient noise. But if you're seeing this now, I'm going to scooch it up a bit. You can see the red areas are alongside Highway 101. And those areas, if you look at the key down below, it's 70 dBA CNEL, which is a weighted average. And then it goes down to 65 and 60. So, and then outside where there's no color, that's going to be something less than 60 here. So that's the presumed 50 is the area that is not, 50, 40, and 50.
So Commissioner, that doesn't necessarily specifically answer your question, I guess, about the 40 or 50 between the hills and the flats. But let me ask our consultant to give us some examples of what 40 dB is and what 50 dB is, so that we have some context for the neighborhood. Michael?
Good evening, commissioners. This is Michael Phil. I'm with Illingworth and Rodkin, and we were assisting the city staff with this noise ordinance update. To answer your question, the 50 dBA and 40 dBA noise limits were established based on data that we have in our files from noise measurements that we've made in and around the city of Palo Alto. Based on the very low nighttime noise levels that we'll measure over a 24-hour period, and the actual standards that we came up with seem to line up well with those ambient noise levels, as well as the noise limits that are established by other local communities.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful context.
Commissioner Templeton, is your light on? No, okay. Commissioner Reckdahl and then Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, I had a question on slide 12, the home improvement exception. I'll bring that up.
Of course.
First, just a big picture question is, how does that work? Is that a director's waiver, or is that the council has to approve that, or how does one get a home exception improvement?
Sure, I'll explain. And this is applicable for the R1 areas as well as other areas that can avail themselves on this, residential, of course. And what this is a discretionary application that there's a fee for, and the staff will compare the request to the purpose and the applicability and findings for home improvement exception. And it is a director's level decision. It is the same process flow as the individual review. applications, which are for two-story homes. So if somebody were aggrieved by the director's decision, a tentative decision, they could call up, ask for a hearing, no charge, and there can be a director's hearing that would, they can present their concerns if they're aggrieved by a tentative decision, and then there's a second decision made, and that is appealable to council following the director's hearing.
When you say it's appealable, if the applicant does not get approval, then they can appeal, or can the neighbors appeal both
It
directions?
can, yeah, depending on what the decision, if it's a tentative denial and the applicant wishes to protest that, the applicant can call a director's hearing, then there could be a second decision, and that could be appealed to council. It could be either way, a neighbor who is objecting, or if it's a denial, the applicant themselves.
Okay, and I noticed one change that was made from the packet to the supplemental today was there used to be a 2 dB limit, and now that limit's.
Yeah. It's been removed so that it's a more generic statement. This new number 16 is to allow electrification equipment to exceed the noise ordinance standards set forth in 910. It doesn't say by how much, and that was a conscious decision today to leave it open, again, because it gets confusing when you have a table and you also have this. It gets hard to put together and understand. So it leaves it in the director's hands to make the findings and then the process to go forward if they can't meet the presumed compliance on the chart.
Okay, but the original 2 dB, that must have been come up with some type of analysis that says this is what's going to be required. It makes me nervous not to have any limit that the director can change. And I'm sure, Jonathan, do you want to talk to this, or?
So
Okay, so Commissioner Rectal, thanks for the question. So up until this ordinance, and presently, as I understand it, there is no provision in the home improvement exceptions to even request this type of deviation from the standard. So the 2 decibels that you're referencing is part of that cleanup that we were looking at today, and I apologize again for the late memo on that. I'll let our consultant speak to this so you can hear it from a person of authority. But as I understand it, 2 decibels is really almost imperceptible to hear, and so going through a process for a 2 decibel level change isn't very helpful for the person who's requesting it or staff processing. So
I agree with that. To me, okay. I was more surprised that the limit was taken. I agree, 2 dB. It seems like that's diminishing returns for the owner to have to pay a fee and do a bunch of hoop jumping for 2 dB. But as a result, now we have no maximum, and so I'm curious about that. But we can talk to if the consultant wants to voice his opinion. I'd be interested.
Well, I'll weigh in. I mean, certainly welcome the consultant to offer some perspective on that, but this is really a policy consideration for the commission to weigh in. We don't know all the different scenarios. We're trying to be flexible. We're trying to create opportunities to advance this technology. And we see this as an opportunity to have a sort of low-cost way to address challenging situations that we can't foresee right now. I will tell you, if somebody says that they can't make that standard, we're going to require a noise study as part of that to document, that it's not going to be impactful to the neighbor. And we'll get some more data to be able to establish what an appropriate threshold is. You know, we're not going to approve something that is going to be excessively loud. But if the commission felt that that judgment would not be consistently exercised from now into perpetuity, if you wanted to establish a maximum limit, here we might want to ask the consultant to weigh in on what an appropriate standard or dB limit it might be. Previously in the code, we had 6 dB, or currently have 6 dB as a reference. So I'll ask Michael if he thinks that is an appropriate standard to continue, and then for the PTC to consider whether you want that standard or you want to leave it open-ended. Michael?
Well, thanks, Jonathan. Getting back to what you were speaking about briefly about noise levels, a 1 dB change in noise levels is not detectable outside of a laboratory. A 3 dB change is barely detectable, and a 5 dB change is clearly detectable. A 10 dB change would be a doubling of loudness. So with regard to Commissioner Rectal's comment, you know, an exceedance of 2 dB is probably not worth it, but 5 would be on the order of something that the commission could consider.
Are you,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just, I was pondering there. On one hand, I don't want to over legislate. And if we trust Jonathan, I'm not so much worried about trusting Jonathan, but trusting person who comes after Jonathan. His successor might not have the same thoughtfulness that he has. But I would think we're already saying that they can go 6 dB above ambient. So I would think that we want to limit that to maybe another 6 dB. So it'd be now you're 12 dB above ambient. That's quite loud. So I think that still would give staff a lot of flexibility. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
okay, Commissioner Liu?
My questions were answered through that exchange.
Sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No more-
I have the
oh.
same question as Commissioner Rectal on the logic behind 6 and 8 and the changes there. So my questions are answered.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go on to Commissioner Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. So I had several. I may have to split this up into 2 parts, one for staff and one for the consultant, perhaps later. So first, correct my misunderstanding if I'm wrong about this, but as I read the current version of the noise ordinance, there's no objective standard. It's simply you would have to measure the local ambient and then you're allowed to go 6 dB above that. Is that the current state of affairs?
Yes, you're allowed to exceed noise 6 dB above the local ambient. That's how it's written.
Okay, so I borrowed a meter and I went out to measure a few local ambients. And down here in the flats, after 8 p.m. at night, I measured 38 dB. And without traffic running, that is local ambient conditions as specified in the ordinance, 48 dB during the day. So one of the things that struck me about what I think I'm reading here is that we're saying we can go to 50 at night, and the cause is not necessarily electrification equipment. This is a general floor on the ambient measurement that applies to the local ordinance, noise ordinance, regardless of source. So is that a correct interpretation?
The intent was electrification equipment as in 910.030C.
Yes, but you're correct. It would apply to other noise producing equipment. So for example, an air conditioning compressor would also be subject to these standards.
Yeah, anything.
Noise
Yeah.
producing equipment.
Right. Okay.
But we define electrification equipment specifically in the ordinance.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy goal to try and make it easier to electrify. And I appreciate the presumed compliance approach. I think that's a good one. And I like the general structure here. I'm trying to get a handle on what the environmental consequences of that will be. And whether there are unintended consequences, like perhaps other noise sources will come into play that we didn't anticipate when we were thinking about electrification alone. So yes, there have been a bunch of excellent studies in the last 2 years about the connection between noise pollution and health, particularly cardiovascular health. So I was a little worried about the idea that we would be raising the noise floor to 50 dBA for all sources permanently everywhere on the flats. So I have a little concern about that. The other questions I have are more technical and I think should be directed to the consultant. So perhaps I can delay those and let everybody have a chance to ask about the local issues first.
I'm happy to follow the commission's lead on that. I would like to maybe offer a couple comments if possible. So a couple of things, and maybe we can have the consultant weigh in on this. I know for our own interests, noise meters have a certain calibration and techniques that you have to go through, and maybe you're skilled and you know how this goes. But I would like our consultant to sort of speak to that. Again, some of the data that we're relying on here, not only is it consistent with other neighborhoods, neighboring cities, but also data that this firm has collected. So we should at least hear some of that information.
In fact, that's one of my questions for the consultant was,
very good.
Where's the local noise survey?
Okay. And then a couple of things I wanted to note, and again, understanding that this applies to variable equipment, different types of equipment. But with respect to heat pumps, which is sort of the new technology that is different from what we're experiencing in the past with respect to the noise ordinance. A lot of this technology, and I will acknowledge I'm not an expert in this, and so this is bits and pieces that I've picked up along the way, and I welcome anybody who has different knowledge to weigh in and offer another perspective on this. But the technology itself uses an inverter, which has a variable speed and noise associated with it, and it's not always on like a AC compressor is always on. I know my neighbors are probably not too happy with my unit as it needs to be serviced, I think. But a heat pump will sort of rise to the occasion, and they're designed to be really efficient. So they're not, there's something else to think about in terms of how that noise is generated. Now, any noise, even if it's ramping up at 2 o'clock in the morning, could still be, bothersome. So I don't want to discount that at all. And then the other thing is just the, actually, I was going to get into some other aspects as to why we think these numbers are somewhat conservative, but maybe I'll let Michael speak to that in terms of his experience and his studies as well. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. I really appreciate this discussion, and I do like it quiet, and I do appreciate cardiac health. So, but sounds like Commissioner Aiken has that covered. I did want to respond to some comments earlier. I think that was Commissioner Reckdahl about writing in some additional absolute numbers for boundaries for the director. And in general, I oppose that kind of, for lack of a better term, forgive me, I don't mean exactly like this, but like that kind of micromanagement in the written stuff, because we do have another outlet if somebody in the director's seat were making a poor decision, we do have the right to appeal and bring it to council. So I feel like there is a escape valve there that would make it less necessary for us to write it in, write it down this way. So just to share another opinion, I do think we need to be mindful of it. And I think we need to make sure that people who have concerns are aware of that so that they can exercise their rights, but we may not need to code it in. Thank you.
Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. So just to pick up on that, I also agree that the process that's built in provides sufficient protection. If our own council can't make a proper decision on how loud a piece of equipment can be, then I think we have much larger institutional problems. I do think that the really, to my mind, the drawback of not having some sort of max is that the people who are going to buy these pieces of equipment for their homes, they're by and large not noise consultants. And they won't know whether 3 dB is a little or a lot or 12 dB is a little or a lot. They're just not going to know. And so there may be, because they don't know, they may become enamored with some model that's really loud and they just don't know it. But then they go through this process and they have to pivot. Whereas if they knew on the front end, hey, this is advertised as making 75 dB, and the limit is 50, so you're going to be asking for something that's 25. That might say, oh, you know what, this is going to be too loud, and they'll look for something closer to the range. So I'm not going to suggest we put in a max, but I'm just planting that seed for staff to think about that there could be a benefit in shaping expectations of the applying public. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second, I actually wanted to get a little clarification on our job tonight, because in the staff report on page 8 of 10, under discussion, it says that our purview doesn't include recommendations beyond titles 18 and 21, but you're seeking our feedback on particularly on Title 9 tonight, because what happens in Title 9 may affect what we think about 18 and 21, right? So I get that. And of course, Title 9 is where these new thresholds of 40 and 50 are going to show up. And so we need to know that as we think about the language in 18 and 21. Okay, I'm with all that. What I'm not getting is the title of the item tonight is recommendations to council regarding Title 18 and Title 9 and Chapter 9. And so, but I don't think we're making recommendations on those things. So when we get to a motion, if you will help us parse that so we're staying in our lane. Okay, third point. Let's see. So we're defining, as Ms. French mentioned, we are now defining electrification equipment. And this is one of my little ordinance pet peeves. And we give it a definition, and it's a capital E electrification, capital E equipment. All right, but then as you roll through our beautiful new ordinance, it is seldom, if ever, capitalized unless it's at the beginning of a sentence, and electrification is never. So choose a path. Either don't have it a capitalized defined term, or define it and capitalize it, and that happens maybe a dozen times. I did have one. Let's see, where is this? Section 2 Section 18.10.040 Development Standards, Subpart 1. 5 lines down, you have a sentence that starts this way. Except as otherwise provided in this title, EVSE and energy storage systems, comma, electrification equipment shall not be located, blah, blah, blah. I don't, it's like you're missing some punctuation or a word there. And so if staff will just look at that first clause and see if there's a way to make it more legible. Let's see. I had a couple more. If you're dropping out the heat pump, which is little I, then then you've got your next one is a 2 little I. So that either becomes a 1 little I, or if it's the only thing, you don't need any I's. So it's a numbering thing. And then finally, in section 5, 18.40.060, we're just adding subpart F, which I think actually, because it's only one underline, this is something we discussed last December. But it said electrification equipment for residential uses only. When installed in a required yard, comma, electrification equipment and any associated housing, screening, blah, blah, blah. What is a required yard? Do we know what?
That would be if I can answer, setback would be what's the minimum required yard would be more required.
Okay, so can staff look at that language and see if the word should be setback instead of yard? Because I was like, well, I should know what I meant. So, yeah, if setback should be in there somewhere. All right, so those were my comments. I'm supportive of the direction staff is taking on this. I accept their mea culpa on the late delivery of the memo today. And, actually, I wanted to just say that I often say that one time does not make a habit. And when I was thinking about this memo being delivered with ordinance changes, I've been on the commission 3.5 years. And while, sometimes we get a late at-place memo relating to some things that have come in from the outside that staff wants us to be alerted to, this is actually about the first time I can remember in 3.5 years having this happen. So I assume there were reasons for it. But I recognize that staff, I think, labors to not have it happen. So, and I appreciate those efforts, which, are the absence of a bad thing, so you don't often notice it. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask for clarification because I think I know why Commissioner Heckman wanted us to do the capitalization thing. And I did find one where it was one biggie and one little e on page 8 under home improvement exceptions. But were you wanting it to be consistent because Ms. French referred to a list of equipment and is that what that means legally? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, I think, and I don't know if Mr. Yang is here tonight, but oftentimes when you define a term, you define it with capital letters, and then you use it with capital letters across multiple ordinances to tell people, hey, somewhere else in the code, we actually have, these aren't just 2 random words.
Right.
These are actually, defined in 4 sentences someplace, and you better go look at that if you're not sure what it means. But when you don't capitalize it, even though it's defined, people don't know to go look for it. And so I do think it's Palo Alto's custom to try to capitalize the defined terms throughout the ordinances. And so I think this is just.
And is that the name of the list you were referring to, Ms. French?
The electrification equipment definition 49 that we are putting in the code.
So whenever the 2 words together throughout are used, regardless of capitalization currently, but that's what you mean.
Correct.
And so that's why Commissioner Heckman is saying, let's be consistent so that we all know what it's referring to.
It's like a flag that's going up. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think actually all the places where it shows up in the draft ordinances that we've been given, it's all new language. It might have been new from December, but it's not, none of it is existing ordinance today with those 2 words together. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I assumed on packet page 15 that Title 21 was just a typo. Because we're not, Title 21 wouldn't be relevant to this topic, I didn't think. So maybe,
Well, yeah, Title 21 subdivisions is in the purview of the Planning Commission,
Yeah.
as is Title 18, whereas Title 9 noise is not normally.
Yeah.
There's no requirement, put it that way, for the Planning and Transportation Commission to give a recommendation to council on this. It's more, again, because of the tangential nature of this
I see.
to the residential regulations.
okay. I don't have any technical questions. I don't see any speakers, but I would just like to clarify that with Ms. Klicheva.
That is correct. No raised hands from the public and no speaker cards.
Okay, so if somebody pops up, you better put your hand up quickly. Otherwise, we'll bring it back to the, I see that Commissioner Aiken has his light on, so we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Chair. So I had a couple of things I wanted to follow up with Mr. Till, if possible. The first one is, how are the equipment noise level ratings validated? How much can we trust the table that we have before us?
Great. That's a good question. The equipment ratings table was based on an evaluation of about over 100 different pieces of equipment that had been installed recently in Palo Alto, as well as other equipment that we could find in our research. So what we did is we looked at all of these different types of equipment. These are data reported by the manufacturers following certain noise measurement protocols. And, they're considered accurate for the purposes of doing an assessment like this.
So there is some standardized procedure for measurement, which we believe the manufacturers have all followed.
Correct.
Okay. One thing I really liked, by the way, is the suggested guidelines that were prepared. And among other things, they mentioned the possibility of noise barriers. And I think all of us understand the potential problems with full enclosures, but barriers are a different thing and may be extremely useful. So the question I had for Mr. Till is, did you evaluate various techniques for noise barriers? And do you have any recommendations that we should know about along those lines?
Right. So in order to provide a credible worst case analysis, these setbacks do not consider noise barriers, reflections, and other complicating issues. These are just the setbacks required to allow the natural attenuation and meet the noise level at the property plane. The Palo Alto Noise Ordinance specifically mentions the property plane. So if you have a situation where you have a second-story bedroom looking down on this equipment, a typical noise barrier is not going to interrupt the line of sight and provide any additional attenuation.
Right. I'm getting at this a bit by analogy. There will be barriers of certain sizes and types which couldn't exist in a setback. But there may be others which could, in the same way that, say, a trellis can exist in a setback today, or something like an interior, a light interior structure. So the particular technology you have available to you for use as a noise barrier might be interesting to know something about, because you might be able to construct a barrier that's effective even when you're very close to the setback. And my goal here is not to enumerate all of those tonight, but simply to make sure that that information is available so that the suggestions that are given in the guidelines could be pursued. I understand our purview doesn't include Title IX, but if I were designing everything from scratch, one of the things that I would consider is, are there any of those recommendations in the guidelines that council might want to say are mandatory? And so information of that kind might be useful when they have to make that decision. So that's why I'm bringing that up. And the last question for Mr. Till is about surveys. So what kinds of ambient noise level surveys have been performed? How comprehensive were they? How old were they?
So for this particular project, we did not conduct an ambient noise survey throughout the city of Palo Alto. What we did is we mined through our existing data for projects that we had worked on in the past. We looked at the daily trends in noise levels and looked at the what is defined as the ambient, or it's the L90 noise level. So it's the noise level that's exceeded 90% of the time. And we looked at those levels and found that in most situations that the nighttime ambient was somewhere between about 42 to 44 dBA. And based on the existing Palo Alto noise ordinance and the allowance of that 6 dBA above the local ambient, it again lined up pretty well with the thresholds that make sense for nighttime noise. These thresholds are I wouldn't say they're conservative, but they are not at a level where we would expect substantial complaints. So again, the purpose of this update was to facilitate the electrification, and Jonathan and others kept pushing me, but these are about the highest noise levels that I would be comfortable recommending to the commission.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Chang and then Commissioner Liu.
Thanks. I just had a quick question about part of the proposed code. And so if I understand correctly, so for the proposed ordinance for 9.10.030 residential property noise limits, we're going to strike C(i), but we would keep C(2i), right? Which says electrification equipment in areas with local ambient noise over 50 dBA shall be subject to generally applicable noise standards. And I just wondered what that meant. Like, what does that mean in action? So if I have a piece of equipment in an area where the local ambient noise is very loud already, say right by the train, then if it's subject to generally applicable noise standards, I just can't exceed. Is it just then that I'm bound by 9.10.030 A and B, or is it something else? I'm just trying to understand what that part of the code is saying.
Yes, I might, through the chair, the regular A and B would be applicable then. So if let's say it's 52 dBA, that's the local ambient, then it would be 6 above that.
Okay.
That's what that's saying.
I'm confused because aren't we defining that basically all of Palo Alto is either going to be 40 or 50? Isn't that what we're defining?
Well, we
That-
do. We do have areas that are over that. Like earlier near Highway 101 that you get, or near El Camino, that starts to be the CNEL, at least that's the weighted average over the day, is more closer to 70. And then so we would allow a 76 dBA at that point.
So, I'm sorry. So, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
thank you for flagging that. And the intent of this provision is to address those scenarios where the ambient exceeds the 40 in the hills and the 50 in the flats. And I recall as we were sort of scrambling around this afternoon, making some adjustments, I think this was another item that we were going to slightly modify. And I don't know if Mr. Yang is able to join us at the moment or not, but I think this is one that we wanted to maybe tweak a little bit further. Mr. Yang, I see your camera's on. Do you recall for new C Romanet I? I think we were going to adjust that 50 dBA standard and make it a little bit more general.
Well, so it's 50 because the table, it's not 50, it's above 50 because the table covers areas where the ambient is presumed to be 40 or 50. And then if you have an area where in actuality the ambient is above 50, then you wouldn't be covered by the table anymore. So that standard is meant to address those situations that the table does not.
Okay, but I'm confused because if I look at, okay, 9.10.20, which has definitions, it says, for the purposes of this chapter, in no case shall the local ambient be considered or determined to be less than 30 for interior noise, 40 in the Palo Alto foothills areas, and 50 in all other sections. So everywhere else. So we're just defining it.
Right. Okay. So in those areas,
it's less than 50. I see. Okay. Yeah. So it could be greater than 50. I see. Okay.
Yeah, if you live in a particularly noisy neighborhood, that's when that little CI comes into play.
Okay. So then if I live in a noisier section and I want to install a electrification equipment, theoretically, I could be allowed, I mean, I could use this table and I definitely would be well within reason to use this table, but theoretically I could be allowed to install it even closer to the property line. But then where would I be? I would need a noise study in order to do that?
That's right.
Okay.
So agreeing with that and also saying the equipment would be no closer than 3 feet. And if you had equipment that you wanted to place and it was louder than ambient, the reference is to the other section of the code that allows for 6 dB above ambient. So if you're in that noisy neighborhood and you want to put in a heat pump, we would measure and understand the ambient noise level, and then you can go 6 dB above that with your equipment.
Right, and I'd have to be highly motivated because I'd have to go through all that trouble in order to do it rather than rely on the table. Okay, great, thanks. That's just, I just wanted to kind of go through that exercise to understand if I fall into that bucket, what do I do? But that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Liu?
Yeah, I'll start with a set of questions that kind of pick up on that thread. So if I were in a multi-family unit, how exactly would the setbacks and the tables work? Like, say I live directly on top of my neighbor. What would happen in that situation?
So I guess there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about as a tenant. One would be working through your property owner, landlord. Individual tenants probably wouldn't have that install a heat pump system, but maybe. But in any event, you're still subject to the same setbacks. And so on a multi-tenant building, the setbacks are the same regardless of where the unit is located. So you still have your sides and your rear yards. You may be and maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, but if you're in a 5-unit apartment building, your setbacks are the same, and it's the property owner that's going to need to install that or authorize its installation in a way that would conform with the standards.
Got it. So like I own a condo and I'm on a stack of 3 units. And so basically I could theoretically place it anywhere within this setback within the whole property line for the entire multifamily property, as long as my neighbors presumably agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are CC&Rs and other regulations that would come into play, so I wouldn't want to give advice on that. But
right.
Okay.
Yeah, just wanted to sanity check that. First of all, secondly, when we considered the neighboring cities' noise standards and there were minimum or maximums like 40 or 50 for nighttime ambient, did those cities also have variations like exceptions for El Camino or 101 or things like that?
Michael, do you have insight into that?
I can't tell you offhand because I have not memorized the municipal codes of all of these cities. But based on my experience, typically when the ambient exceeds the noise limit, then the ambient becomes the limit, or the ambient plus some number becomes the limit. So there's typically an adjustment so that we're not saddling somebody with a noise limit that can't be achieved in a louder noise environment.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So other cities will likely have that kind of variable adjustment. I mainly asked this thread of questions because Palo Alto would be the only city then with 2 different thresholds depending on where in Palo Alto you are. And it's not obvious if that's a problem or extra complexity, but it's arguably or potentially not necessary. So can you elaborate on why we came up with 2 numbers and the specific motivations for 40 versus 50?
Yeah. Again, Palo Alto has a very urbanized area down in the flats, which is very similar to East Palo Alto, Los Altos, Menlo Park, Mountain View, Sunnyvale. And then there's also areas where it's in the foothills. And again, very similar noise environments to Los Altos Hills, Portola Valley, etc. So really, we recognized early on that we needed to have a more restrictive nighttime noise standard in the quieter areas as opposed to the louder areas.
Got it. So the motivation is really just to make sure that the areas that are quiet right now will continue to be quiet going forward.
Correct.
Okay.
The variation in Palo Alto is such that a single number would not effectively regulate noise at all properties throughout the city. And probably goes back to the reason that, you know, the ambient was always the defining point for which a noise exceedance was based upon. However, having to understand what the ambient is and predict what the noise level, if the noise level will be exceeded by 6 dB is quite an effort when we're talking about installing pieces of equipment like this.
Okay, got it. I would generally push back against extra rules where other cities, which do not exactly have as much open space, but still have like much quieter areas and much more urbanized if they can mostly get by with one maximum, I would generally push back. I don't think I would actually push back in this case, because I don't know, it seems relatively straightforward to actually manage. Just to confirm, where's the dividing line between the foothills and the flats?
We haven't created a map for that. So that's one area where if somebody were to say, show us the boundary, we haven't done that.
Okay. That actually feels quite confusing since there are a lot of hilly areas where you could reasonably argue you feel like you live in the foothills, even though you are on one side of 280 or one side of Juniper Serra or something like that. I'll have to think about that and how weird that gets if we don't have a map.
So I'm sorry, Commissioner, if I could just weigh in on that. So we will, I do think there's some reference materials available to us in the comprehensive plan and maybe some other documents. So we'll take a look at that. But again, I want to note that provision that we were referencing just a moment ago, section C, Romanet I, would then address the situations where in those different environments, if you exceed the ambient, or if your ambient is louder than 50, then there's a way for addressing that too.
Okay. Yep.
I have a follow-up. But I'll wait till you're done, Commissioner Liu.
Oh, I had one last question, which is just looking through the application so far. I think in item 2, it's for heat pumps. It seems like the vast majority are for single family homes, though condos and apartments and multifamily units are around 40% or more of our total housing stock. So in general, I'm just curious what we've considered to help multifamily buildings electrify. And yeah, like if we have, what other measures we might have considered, or what other measures might have worked in other cities. So that's for both consultants, the consultant and staff.
So if I can clarify your question, what incentives are we looking at for advancing heat pump technology or other green technology for rental properties?
Or for owner occupied condos as well.
Sure. So
yeah, is there anything in particular that we can do or we have thought of doing, or do we just think condos are in townhomes and things like that are kind of covered well enough with these measures and don't need anything additional?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One is, I mean, what we're dealing with here is, I guess the starting place for this exercise is the city has an expressed interest to advance this technology and facilitate our ability to issue permits for this and not have, the department be sort of a roadblock toward implementation. And so from that lens, that's why we have the ordinance that's before you today, is because we are looking at location and placement of the equipment on property and with consideration to the adjacent properties. So that's the perspective we've taken. It's a very physical location on a site that we're trying to manage. I know our utilities operation is working on a variety of incentives that would include apartments and single family homes, properties. I just don't have a lot of knowledge about that, but we can see what we can get from our colleagues and pass that along to the commission as way of information that on things that we are doing, the incentives that the city is offering to extend those offers to opportunities to apartments and condominium owners would also presumably be eligible for similar incentives that are available to single family property owners.
Does the consultant have any takes on what could actually work for multifamily electrification in an ordinance?
I think again, from this perspective, we were looking at this as a credible worst case. I think for multifamily units, for condos, this type of equipment is normally placed on the roof of the building. I've seen retrofits where they, put it right outside of the unit. But I think again, in a condo type setting, that would be pretty difficult to have everybody approve that.
Okay. It sounds like the takeaway for me is generally that condos are, of course, much more complicated for individual owners because of HOAs and the proximity of neighbors, and that there is no specific plan or ambition to accelerate the electrification of condos in particular versus single family homes. And yeah, that is the end of my set of questions.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Templeton has a follow-up question, and then we're going to go to Commissioner Reckdahl.
Yes, apologies to Commissioner Reckdahl. I know you've had your hand up. I just wanted to, as close to when the statement was made by our consultant as possible, object to the idea that Palo Alto can be classified into the hills and not the hills. It's extremely offensive and it's classist, and we should have the ability to maintain our quiet down here in Barron Park and Professorville and anywhere else as they do in the hills. And I don't understand what that's based on. My neighborhood is very quiet. There are other parts of town I imagine are not as quiet, and I understand that. But I just, the whole idea of painting Palo Alto with just two brushes in this very broad way is very problematic as far as I'm concerned. So I did want to ask that as a question, but since Commissioner Reckdahl's been waiting so patiently, I can come back to all that later. Thank you.
Well, he's going to have to wait a second more because I have a follow-up to your follow-up. And I was thinking along the same lines, but somewhat differently. Not that I find it offensive, but I find it too rigid because, for instance, in my neighborhood, I happen to live, and my next door neighbor happened to be in two non-conforming houses. We're both really close to the property line. I hear everything they do. Okay, but I have a neighbor half a block away who has a really big lot and it's super quiet. And I'm on a traffic circle and it's noisier. So I also have a problem with that. And I just wanted to follow on to the follow-on. But I am now, since I've stated that, going to let Commissioner Reckdahl speak.
Okay. Yeah, first to answer Commissioner Liu's question, other cities have multiple categories. I mean, Los Altos, I know, has 3 categories. And I haven't done a survey, but I suspect other cities are in the same boat as we are. So I don't think that we're doing anything unique by having two different categories. So I share Commissioner Aiken's concerns about, we're doing this for electrification, but we're also going to end up loosening the noise for every other source, whether it's gas generators or lawnmowers or anything like that. And do we need to do that? Can we structure this so that this relaxation is just for electrical equipment and other things? For example, if you have a car or motorcycle, wouldn't we be loosening the noise that could be created by that vehicle too?
So I don't believe we're talking about automobiles, which is regulated under other statutes. But the equipment, and I'll ask Mr. Yang to maybe weigh in on here on this topic as well as you're able. There isn't, while we're trying to advance electrification technology, it's not that much different than an AC compressor, and the AC compressor technology is also improving as well. So we didn't see a need to distinguish between the two types of technologies.
So this ambient, I have a question about the cars and motorcycles. Is that relative to ambient, or how is it legislated?
I think it's different state laws, and I'd have to ask our assistant city attorney to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm actually not entirely sure either, but I imagine it's regulated by the state. It's certainly not something that we regulate ourselves on a vehicle-specific basis. I guess as far as the concern about, are we increasing the local ambient for all purposes? It could be more tailored. That's the approach that we've proposed is, that it applies across the noise ordinance, but it could be an increase that only applies for the purposes of electrification equipment.
I have a question for staff. Oh, sorry. In our history, when we get noise complaints, what's the most common source of noise complaints? What kind of equipment is the biggest offender?
Leaf blowers.
And sometimes generators.
But we don't have the precise numbers for us right now. So we're just telling you what comes to our mind.
Yeah, I understand.
So
is there any?
I guess one suggestion I would have, if we wanted to do a more tailored approach, is to move the sort of regulations, setting these sort of presumed ambient levels from the definitions into section 9.10.030C. So the definitions would remain unchanged, and then in that section C, we could say, for purposes of electrification equipment, the ambient will be considered, X in these areas and Y in other areas.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just weigh in and thank Mr. Yang for identifying a solution to maybe address a potential interest there. But I will note from the other side of the counter, from an administrative standpoint, it's not great for us to have different standards for one piece of equipment versus another piece of equipment that substantially does the same thing. We're trying to advance electrification efforts, and we have a lot of incentives. This is just one of many tools that we're trying to employ. So I would encourage the commission to not bifurcate the standards into two different pieces of equipment.
Are you, Commissioner Rectal, are you finished? Okay.
I'm done, yeah.
I thought you were pondering. So I have a lot of concerns about this. And the more I hear my colleagues talk, the more I feel like what we're doing is, one, making assumptions about current ambient noises. I mean, Commissioner Aiken said his ambient noise was less than what would be considered, and he lives in a dense part of Palo Alto. So I'm concerned about that, and I'm concerned about another thing that hasn't been brought up, and I think the cheaper equipment is noisier. I think that's probably a generalization, but I think from what I read, we can assume that's true. And given how many of our residents are renters, even in single-family homes, I'm worried that landlords, we have a lot of people that own property that don't live in the city, and they'll buy the cheapest equipment, which will be noisy, and then it's going to be the renters or next door renters having to complain about it and worry about repercussions from to their rent or whatever because of it. I think it's kind of problematic. I just feel like maybe 40 and 50 is not only not flexible enough, but I think it's going to result in equipment that might be too noisy. And I think it's really sad on packet page 30, equipment placement recommendations. Those 3 bullets, I just wish they could be woven into, changed into requirements. And I understand how hard this is to do, to try to get one standard all over the city, but those bullets are really good, but they're recommendations, so people don't need to follow them. And I also think people may choose cheaper equipment out of necessity. So, and then what do we do? If somebody chooses really cheap equipment and their neighbor or someone, complains, do they have to then go take that equipment out and buy quieter equipment? Like, it becomes difficult. And also, I don't see anything in the, in what's being proposed in the ordinance that would allow somebody who has a particularly quiet location, despite being in the 50 dB area, to ask for their actual ambient to be respected. So that kind of sums up some of my concerns, and I'm not, I think, I mean, I want to make it easier for people to have flexibility about where they put the equipment, because that makes a lot of sense to me, especially given all the non-conforming situations. But I'm not sure I feel as flexible about the impacts of sound, and that this might be a little too broad. So with that, I will go to Commissioner Heckman.
Thank you. So Commissioner Rechtel had used the term loosening our noise standards. And I thought this really tied to one of the early questions by Vice Chair Chang when she was looking at the language at the top of page 9 of 10, where we have this, as written, it said, and this is just a descriptor, but from staff, raise the local ambient noise level. And I thought our director had spoken to that's really kind of a misnomer. Maybe that piece of the staff report, which is not ordinance language, it's just an explanation to us, could have been written a little differently, because we're not raising. And so I don't know that we're raising or loosening. I do think that, what's before us tonight is an effort by staff, as directed by the council, to try to remove barriers to electrification. And one of a significant barrier to electrification would be if every time you wanted any kind of electrification equipment, you had to go do a noise study. And that's what would be required if the requirement was site specific. So if you could only ever go 6 dB above whatever was there on the day you wanted to put the equipment in, then every time you want to put a piece of equipment in, you'd have to measure the sound. And so I just think that's unworkable. So I do think that I don't disagree that there are quieter parts of every of town. There are quieter parts of every neighborhood compared to others. I mean, I live on Channing, and my street has a little more noise than Hamilton, 1 block behind it, just because there's more traffic. And so that's just part of living in an urbanized area. But we also get to sort of share the benefits of living in an urbanized area. And sometimes we share the detriments by carrying kind of this generic sound level that maybe helps us a little more than our neighbors or hurts us a little more than our neighbors. But I think that's what cities do. And all the cities around us, we have, how they do it. I do think it's kind of interesting, this, and I hadn't really thought about it until Commissioner Templeton brought up this kind of classism. I hadn't really thought of it that way. And I think our sound consultant is some kind of engineer, and you probably didn't either. It's a very logical, right? You've got communities up in the hills that are generally at 40. We've seen the numbers and down 50. And I do think it raises the question that Commissioner Liu brought of where do you draw the line? I don't think we have to do it. I think we could have a citywide standard of 50. But what it really means is, I mean, people do go up into the hills wherever you draw the line to the less dense area and pay for it because they want it a little quieter. And so as a practical matter, it's quieter. I don't know what happens if we say you can go to 50 dB there. Does that allow a neighbor to put in some louder equipment up in the hills than they could if the limit was 40? That's kind of a curious thing to me. And then I guess when I think about the risk of somebody buying the cheapest equipment, and I would agree that there's probably always going to be a temptation to buy the cheapest, and logically the cheapest will often be the noisiest. But this whole process, you have to go through a process, right? It's not so you just don't buy whatever you want. You are going to get a permit, and the thing will have specs. And if the specs you turn in are the cheapest and noisiest, that'll show up. And it'll either fit or not fit our ordinance. If it doesn't, then you have to go through, more process. So I think that we've protected somewhat against that. And if you get a cheap one that's quiet and it complies with the ordinance, great.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. Yeah, I keep thinking about this phrase. I believe Commissioner Aiken mentioned it tonight, unintended consequences. And I understand that our goal is to make it easier to electrify our appliances. And nobody's arguing that. I think what we're discussing is what are some of the unintended consequences of the policies that are proposed that are focused on the benefit without talking about what the possible consequences might be. So the concept that comes to mind is, we bought our home in a lovely quiet part of Barron Park. And we bought it in 2012 before the FAA changed the routes of the airplanes. And I will argue that very minor decibel change of having an airplane fly over our house every 3 minutes or more frequent, depending, certainly was noticeable to us and changed our enjoyment of our outdoor space. So just wanted to say that as well-intentioned as it can be to talk about that, we also have to think about if it went the other way, if it didn't go towards our ideal, what would it be like for other people who are affected by it? Thank you.
Commissioner Rectal and Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, I wonder, what is our purview here? Is that we understand that this allowing electrification equipment in the setbacks, that would be our purview. And perhaps even allowing relaxed noise restrictions would be our purview for that equipment. But changing the general citywide noise ordinance, is that planning and transportation?
So again, we're here because one, we told you that we would come back when we were here last time, exploring other encroachments into setbacks, and we realized that we needed to get a little bit more information to have a little more context for noise producing equipment inside yards. So we're here. We would like your input and would like to forward a recommendation to the council, whether this is a bad idea and don't do it, or we need more information, or go ahead and let's check this out and give it a try. Whatever your recommendation is, I know that the council's interested in getting the rest of the packet of electrification enhancements before them so that they can review it. So we're just looking for your input. We're just looking for, your thoughts on the recommendation. Again, we're I think it's been stated many times here and by myself and others, we're looking to find ways to reduce the regulatory process of installing this equipment without adding unnecessary cost or time to a homeowner or anybody else who might be wanting to install this. And we believe, based on actual data that has been collected by our consultant over time, that based on our code today, based on those studies, that the numbers that we're presenting here are not unreasonable, that they are actually very consistent with the findings that we've had in the field, plus the 6 dB that you're allowed to do by code today. We're not breaking new territory here. We're not pushing the boundary. We're reflecting what can be done today. And we're memorializing it in a table so that we can not have to require to establish a presumed compliance level, so we don't have to require all these reports. Sorry, Commissioner, I think I went a little bit beyond your stated question.
I have a follow-up for the consultant. When he was talking to Commissioner Aiken earlier, he was saying that from his measurements in Palo Alto, it was 43, 44 dB. And then he said with the 6 dB, that raises it to 50, and that's why he thought 50 would be a reasonable number. But 50 is what we're considering to be the floor for ambient, not the limit for noise. So can consultant clarify that his math for that?
No, that's these 40 and 50 dB. These are standards or limits. We're not adjusting these or allowing for an exceedance above that.
Okay, so that's not the way the ordinance is written then, because the ordinance says that the ambient cannot be any less than 50 and that people can go 6 dB above that. So that would be a limit of 56 dB that people could make.
We're actually moving away from that standard. That's the existing standard today to do 6 dB. We're replacing that standard with the table, and the table requires that, depending on where you are in the city, either a 40 dB level or 50. And because noise, and I'll say something here, and our consultant can correct me if I'm wrong, noise dissipates over distance. And that's why we have these additional setbacks for the equipment as it gets louder. So we're not adding 6 dB to the table. The table is the standard. And if we're looking at,
Okay, so Commissioner Chang asked earlier.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Rechtel, can you display the table? The printout we have is in like 4-point.
So earlier tonight, Commissioner Chang was asking what happens if I live in an area where the ambient is 70 dB and I want to have a louder equipment. Well, even if you did a noise survey and showed that your ambient was 70, if you're stuck with a table, then you can't go any higher. Is that the way it is? You're stuck with the table regardless of whether your ambient is above 50 or 60?
No. The way the ordinance is drafted in the at places memo is we say that if you are over the ambient, if your neighborhood exceeds 50 dB, then we default back to the existing provision in the code that says you can go ambient plus 6 dB. And the table has no consequence for, it does not apply in that situation.
Okay, but the wording in the ordinance right now says under no conditions would the ambient be below 50 dB. And so that to me, like, we're kind of mixing and matching terminology.
So what we're saying, if I'm understanding the question and what we're trying to do here is we're saying we're establishing, because we don't know what the ambient is at your property or the one 2 blocks away from you. So what we're doing is establishing a presumed ambient level of 50 dB for most of the city and a presumed ambient level in the hills of 40 dB.
Yeah. The concern I have is sometimes we set it with ambient plus 6 dB, but here we're saying the ambient is 50, but you can't go 50 plus 6 dB. So it's almost like we have apples and oranges, both called ambient.
Maybe I'll ask our consultant maybe to help if he's got some perspective on that. I don't think we're mixing things. I think what we're saying is we want to be able to quickly and efficiently be able to approve this technology for use. And we're saying, depending on where you are in the city, we're going to assume that this is the ambient level. And we don't, and the actual ambient may be less than that.
Yeah, I understand. For low levels, you use the table. For high levels, you use ambient plus 6. That makes sense to me. To me, it's the terminology I'm arguing about. So, but maybe the consultant can chime in.
Yeah, I would agree with you that the references to ambient do tend to confuse the language with regard to the electrification. The noise limit or the noise standard is either 40 dBA or 50 dBA, and there's no adjustment based on the ambient.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
I have Commissioner Liu, then Commissioner Aiken.
Yeah, I appreciate Director Leap grounding the conversation in terms of like the scope of the changes and how it is mostly incremental. So I have one question and one comment. The question is for the consultant. The kind of most notable other piece that was discussed in last time this came before the PTC was the encroachments into front setbacks, inside setbacks. I don't have in front of me right now, but has the consultant looked at that, and does that generally check out, or are there any other alternatives we could look at in terms of a more reasonable setback encroachment? Reasonable in air quotes. I'm not sure what a more reasonable encroachment would actually look like here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a trade-off that you have to make a decision upon. You can either allow the electrification and in the encroachment, but you have to consider that there could be increased noise due to that.
But the encroachment doesn't change the requirement in terms of like the noisiness of the equipment. So if you encroach more, you just have to purchase presumably more expensive, quieter equipment on average, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the encroachment doesn't materially affect the sound levels for the general public at all. And we could just allow the biggest encroachment that seems aesthetically reasonable or safe for fire purposes, and that wouldn't have any impact on the ambient levels, because the ambient levels are already defined in the noise code and the table in terms of distances and the decibels of equipment, right?
Correct. And the table allows for an encroachment up until 3 feet from the property line, which I think is the minimum that's allowed in any case.
Encroachment until 3 feet. Oh, thank you for pulling this up. Okay, right, okay. So 3 feet is the minimum lane for fire or other purposes, and are we specifying anywhere actually in this ordinance, or where are we specifying the ordinance the amount of encroachment that is permissible?
I think I'll have to point back to either Jonathan or Amy to answer that question.
Yeah, because I'm actually not sure. Are we actually saying that as long as the minimum is 3 feet, you can encroach as much as you want into the side setback? I am looking at that and I'm realizing I'm a little bit confused on that point.
Yeah, thank you. We're looking at that now. Did you find it or no?
No.
Okay, so thank you. Well, we have it in the table in the app places memo, but when the commission gets to making an motion, I think one of the things we'd like to do is be more specific about that and say noise producing equipment, can encroach up to 3 feet or maintain 3 feet clear of the property line. Okay, so we do have a reference on
Page 6 of the ordinance.
Page 6 of the ordinance that it's minimum distance for fire safety. And so maybe what we'll do is put a parenthetical reference to 3 feet on there.
Okay. Got it. I'm trying to remember what the exact conversation was from the previous PTC meeting, but it was something like 2 feet or 4 feet into the actual side setback. And so instead, we're just saying as long as there's a minimum of 3, you can encroach as much as you want, basically. And as long as you meet all the other noise requirements. Like that's the kind of default state suggested right now, right?
Well, it's not really you can encroach as much as you want. It's just saying you can encroach up to the distance that's in the table.
Okay, so encroach up to 3 feet. Okay. Okay, I will need to think a little bit more on this one. But one quick comment, I would also be happy to make a motion to recommend a uniform 50 decibel limit across the city. I mean, I think houses in the hills or houses in the foothills will still always be quieter, and the impact will definitely be less noticeable given the lower number of houses and how spaced out those homes are. So given the nuances around equity, given the fact that we haven't drawn a map yet, given just a general desire for simplification, I would be happy to make a motion to recommend 50 decibels. So I'm curious if any other commissioners have any comments on that.
You have 4 comments in line after you, so I would probably wait.
Yeah.
So it sounded like, Chair, that a motion was being made and it doesn't, I'm not hearing a second.
Oh, no, I'm not making that motion. I'm saying I would make a motion, but I'm just curious what other people think.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we have a lot of people waiting to speak. So if you're finished, I didn't take it as a motion, so just interest.
It's not a motion, and I am finished.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, and we'll go to, yes. We'll go to Commissioner Aiken.
Thank you, Chair Sima. I'm going to focus on a technical point first and then bring it around to the hopefully starting towards a resolution. Mr. Till described his measurement technique, which essentially is the sound level that's exceeded 90% of the time. The actual local ambient measurement that's described in the existing noise ordinance is very different from that. It's a low level that's hit twice within a certain period of time, and it's relatively short, if I remember correctly, like 6 minutes. That's going to be lower. And that's, I suspect, the reason for the difference between the numbers that I measured and the numbers that Mr. Till reported. If you take the lower numbers, then we are really describing an increase in the amount of noise that's allowed. Now the question is, how significant is that increase? And looking at the table, a 5 or 6 dB difference in the bottom of the range amounts to about 2 feet in setback. So our purview is in the zoning issues that are related to setback. And we may find that a couple of feet difference is not enough to be significant for us. So the the line of thought here is you need to resolve the ambiguity in how the measurement is made in order to prevent the kind of concerns that are being expressed here tonight. But the practical implications may be small enough that we can go ahead. So that, of course, is up to the remainder of the commission, but that's the thought that occurs to me at the moment. Thank you.
Commissioner Chang?
Thank you, Commissioner Aiken, for your comment. I think that really may put a lot of our fears to rest and was very, very insightful. My comment is following up on what Commissioner Reckdahl was questioning, where I think we may have a problem in how the proposed ordinance is written and how that may actually differ from what Director Late explained as the intent. So as I understand it, our intent is to sort of define ambient as 40 in some areas, or minimum 40 in some areas, minimum 50 in some other areas. We're doing away with the additional 6 or 8 variants that is allowed with respect to electrification equipment, and only with respect to electrification equipment. Is that correct, Director Late? Or that's the intent? Is that the correct intent, Director Late?
Yes, we're replacing the table with ambient plus 6.
Right. Or we're replacing the ambient plus 6 with the table. Yes. Okay, but the problem with that is this. So as I look at and I think this is what Commissioner Reckdahl was trying to get at. So if we look at definitions 9.10.20 D defines local ambient by saying, however, for the purposes of this chapter, in no case shall local ambient be considered or determined to be less than 30 for interior, 40 in the Palo Alto foothills, and 50 in all other sections. All right. Then in section 9.10.30, which I assume those definitions apply to,
I'm showing.
in section A, it says, no person shall produce, suffer, or allow to be produced by any machine, animal, device, or combination of the same, blah, 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 a noise level more than 6 dB above the local ambient at any point outside the property plane, except as modified in C. So you can see that definition of local ambient is now used in 9.10.30A. And so I think that was Commissioner Reckdahl's concern, was that the local ambient definition is being used in A as well as in C. So C is the part that we add, which deals with electrification equipment, which doesn't have the ambient plus 6 dB, right? Because we're striking C little I. But 9.10.30A still has that reference to the 6 decibel above local ambient. And so because we're defining local ambient now to be 40 or 50, what we're resulting in with result to section 9.10.30A is 46 for the foothills and 56 for all other sections. And so I think that was his concern, not with respect to electrification equipment, because that's governed by the table, but with respect to 9.10.30A.
9.38. This is 9. This is it.
Because I'm on board with respect to, I'm really pleased actually to see that we've struck that exception for heat pump condenser units with the 8 decibels above the lower local ambient. I'm really glad to see that we struck that C(i) portion, because that was confusing to me and had some, I had some concerns about that. But now I think there may be an unintended consequence of defining local ambient and having that definition roll forward into 91030A. Unless maybe staff or the attorney could explain to me the implication of that.
Yeah, so I guess I would suggest, I think your points are well taken. And so I would suggest just getting rid of all of our changes to the concept of local ambient. And instead having the table say, for these neighborhoods, it'll be column 1 of the table. For other neighborhoods, it'll be column 2 of the table. And if your local ambient happens to be above 50 decibels, then you'll have the normal 6 dBA.
Right. So I think we just need to sort of adjust. We need to change the like 9.10.30 so that C becomes A.
Oh, no, so I don't think that's necessary.
Really? But I don't see how A.
Okay.
Because I think our difficulty now is with A.
Well, if you get rid of all the changes to local ambient, then A remains just status quo with today.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So then you would just say A, no person. Well, how would you modify A? Because A.
Yeah, so we say, local ambient is defined as it is today.
Yeah.
It is 30 dBA for interior noise and 40 dBA everywhere else.
Right.
And then A continues as it is today, where you can't increase the noise over ambient by more than 6 decibels, except as modified in C. And C now will just say that, the table below will govern acceptable noise levels for electrification equipment.
But then what? So.
And then in the table, instead of referencing a 40 decibel area or a 50 decibel area, we'll just reference the actual places, actual physical locations. So we would really be getting rid of like any idea of changing local ambient. It would just be saying, this is the table for electrification equipment based on where you are.
Okay, then what's the purpose of A?
A is our existing for all other equipment that's not electrification equipment. You can't have a
Or
leaf blower
for
that's
animals or roosters or whatever.
exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Right.
So for roosters, you're still required to measure what local ambient would be.
Yeah, I mean, you can assume
roosters are not governed by a table.
That's right. And you can assume that it's 40 decibels because that's, that's the existing kind of presumption. But if you think it's higher, you can measure it to have your rooster.
And like leaf blowers are not like electrification equipment. So same thing.
Right.
And it also doesn't change pool equipment noise, I believe. I mean, there's other things besides roosters that are noise producing that aren't electric. And though that stays.
But then the problem is that, but then it would stay as ambient, it's not governed by the 40 or the 50 at all then.
Right.
Okay, then that would be fine. That makes sense. That would make sense. Does that address your concerns, Commissioner Rechtel?
Bingo. I'd be quite happy with that.
Perfect. Okay. Because I think, so when we make the motion, I think we need to somehow capture what Mr. Yang has identified, because that was the problem. That was kind of the big sticking point, I think, for many of the commissioners.
I'll type something up, and so then you can just have it to look at when it comes.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. I appreciate all of these efforts at trying to come together. I am not yet on board, and here's why. I just want to make sure everybody here remembers that decibel is a logarithmic scale. So 50 is twice the sound and noise of 40. Roosters, by the way, are 44. So if we're talking about doubling the noise near your house, which is what is in the table, if you wouldn't mind bringing that back up. For example, if you live in Professorville and the ambient noise during the daytime at your house is 43, and your neighbor is putting in 53 decibel equipment within 4 feet of your house, that doubles the noise. And so I'm concerned because there are, as we have many times heard from people in our community, and I know staff is very well aware of this, there are people who are concerned about much lower amounts of noise deltas.
I just want to point out that we allow equipment to go 6 dB beyond that 43, right? So it's not a doubling, it's 43 plus 6. And now we're talking about a delta with an increased setback. So
I'm actually referring to the table because you're having
understand.
areas where you say it's 50, but it's not.
I understand, but it
So-
says it's 50 because it considers the ambient, which at 43 plus 6 gets you to 49. So it's pretty close. It's within a decibel.
But you're saying that's what the ambient is, and we're not measuring it anymore. So that's why I'm concerned,
Okay, but-
because of the grouping may not be fair to some residents.
Okay.
These columns are actually the sound level of the equipment. 1
Right.
meter. And so if this equipment is rated at 49, then you can put it over at, 3 feet away from the 3 feet away. And that means at the boundary, it will be 50 dB.
In an area that's been designated as a 50 decibel area, whether or not that's actually accurate.
And again, in that example,
Okay.
we allow equipment to be 6 decibels above the ambient. So when we hear a reference to 50, 43 or 44, and you add the 6 for the equipment that we'd already allowed today by code, that would get you to 50 at the property line, 49 or 50 at the property line. And what this table does is it respects that 50 dB at the property line. So we're not doubling anything. We're reflecting what could be done today.
What, I mean, you're just talking about 49. This table goes on, and you're
It does,
definitely
but
more
then
than
also the
doubling.
setback increases too because
Okay, well,
sound
I was giving
dissipates.
you an example where the setback was going from 3 to 4.5, and the number of decibels allowed was,
So that you achieve a 50 dB at the property line.
okay, but it's not 50 dB at the property line now. That's what I'm saying. You're
Okay.
saying it's 6,
I'm-
and I'm saying it's,
Okay.
you're the one that's saying it's 50, right? But we
Because
don't have any
it's-
evidence for that, because I know you care about evidence. You mentioned it earlier. So the data says that it has to be measured, and
We're-
it's different
we're
from
saying-
house to house.
We're saying that it cannot exceed 50 at the property line. Right? Okay, that's what the table says. It has louder equipment further away from the property line so that by the
You're-
time it gets to the property line, it's no more than
You're
50.
saying the decibels degrade that quickly?
That's what our consultant is providing for us. That's why we have these setbacks here.
That's very different than some things we have heard when we did decibel studies elsewhere in the city, like on the train.
Okay.
Like it was,
Yeah.
go ahead, Keith.
You can't, yeah. So I mean, that's the thing today is that, let's say you did a noise survey and found out that your ambient in your neighborhood was 43. Then you could put in something that delivered 49 dB at the property line. That's the current zoning right now.
Right.
And so what I think Jonathan is saying is that it's not a big departure. It might be, depending on where you are, it might be 1 or 2 dB different, but it's not drastically different. But yet the point I want to make is today, your neighbor or you can put in equipment that doubles the noise. In fact, more than doubles. That if the ambient is a certain amount, you can put in something that's 6 dB, which is twice as much sound pressure as ambient. And that's the current regulation that's allowed. So, which is, it's kind of sobering, but yet depends whether you're the neighbor or whether you're the one who wants to put in the equipment.
Sure. You know, if you guys think this is not going to cause a problem, you can vote how you want to vote. I'm just letting you know that I have spent many hours in this room listening to people complain about much smaller differentials. And I understand and respect that. So I'm looking here at the chart of decibels, and every time it doubles, every 10 points, it's pretty significant noise. And if you're sensitive to noise, or if you move to a quiet neighborhood, you're going to notice it. So I would keep those things in mind. I understand, though, if we want to simplify things and make it easier to apply for electric equipment, and that is the overriding concern, that's understandable. For me, I want to make sure that I can enjoy living in my home as well as being eco-friendly. So I just don't want to make things worse for myself or my neighbors, and I don't want that to happen to me. Thanks.
Commissioner Aiken? No? Heckman?
So I'll ask a question I asked asked earlier, but I don't really think I got an answer. Is it within the Planning Commission's purview to make recommendations on Title IX tonight? Or are we just being provided that information for, our discussion to inform the motion, the recommendation we do make regarding Title 18?
Yeah, so the PTC doesn't have discretion or authority over this title. However, this is a policy initiative that is going to the city council, and I made the choice that I wanted to engage the commission because you've been involved in other electrification related matters, and so we thought it would be helpful and complete the process to run this by you. And at least when we go to the council, we can say we've run this by the commission, they've looked at it, and they agree that this is heading in the right direction, or not. And here are some changes, or here's what we need to do. So we're just looking to get more, when we go to the commission, to the council, we just want to know that we've got the commission's support with the changes that we're making.
Okay, let me ask sort of the legal side of this question to Mr. Yang. If we make if the PTC makes a recommendation to the council, let's say we make a motion that only has to do with Chapter 9, right? Are we within our authority to do that? Or,
yeah,
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So under our code, the PTC must review changes to titles 18 and 19. But it may also provide recommendations on other matters relating to planning and transportation as requested by the council, the city manager, or the planning director. So here you are being requested to provide a recommendation on something that's in Title IX. So this is within your purview because the director has asked you to do so. Okay,
great. Because obviously, I think nearly all the conversation we're having is on Title IX rather than 18. So, and I think it's been, a very robust discussion. And I do see the issue that Commissioner Rectal and then Vice Chair Chang picked up on. I wouldn't call it an unintended consequence as much as just a logic gap in the changes that are made here. Because when I'm looking at the definition we have of local ambient, that's our current definition, except for the stuff with 2 lines below it, which is where we're going to basically move the city other than the foothills to 50, right? That's new. Everything else is in our ordinance today. And similarly in 9-10-30 Part A, that's our existing language, but we've added this modification, except as modified in C. And I think the point that my fellow commissioners made, that what you're doing is I think it was correct that, okay, we're going to citywide increase the allowed noise level, or this 50, which is like an acceptable, but the table is only applied to the electrification equipment. And so everything that's not electrification equipment gets the benefit of this change that we're making to recognize the 50 without the limits, without the application of the table. So that makes sense to me. And I honestly couldn't exactly follow Mr. Yang's potential solution. And so hopefully somebody who did will help formulate that part of the motion, because I did see that as a gap that we need to potentially fill. I don't have an issue with moving the noise level to 50, which from the information we have is consistent with every other city that is, urbanized city, not one of the hillside towns. So, and there's probably a reason for that. And I don't view those cities as particularly different or louder than ours. So I'm okay with the concept of the 50, but I think that it needs to not have the caveats just for electrification to encourage those, but actually will allow other types of facilities to benefit from that higher number than they could today. So I think we have to close that gap.
Okay, so allow me to be confused by my colleague, because I thought the discussion before was that all other equipment in terms of noise will be at the ambient +6, except electrification, to encourage people to move to that kind of equipment, we're assuming a general standard for decibel level and allowing it in the setback, but adjusting it from the setback to, I think the intention was to sort of maintain the same decibel level for everyone, but to allow more flexibility in the setback. And if the decibel level goes up, the setback is further. Is that correct? I don't know if you.
I was not tracking that. I mean, we have a motion that Albert has put together. We can maybe get that on the screen, and that will give us something to respond to. Medina, would you mind?
If I may rephrase the chair's question so you can hear it again. It was around, is the different distances in the setbacks related to mitigating the additional noise? So the higher the noise is, the more it's set back.
That was what table
Yeah.
A or 1 was about. Yeah.
And to also clarify that other equipment that is not electrification equipment we want to incentivize still is ambient +6.
That's the way the motion or the potential motion is drafted, that it would only affect electrification equipment. Wait. Right, that's fine. I don't know that it's, well, it's fine.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
I wouldn't call it a incentive, but I understand the desire to focus it on electrification, because that's what we've been talking to you about, is advancing that. But I don't see a significant difference between this or an AC compressor. But if the commission wants to make that distinction, that's fine. We can advance that.
Okay. Any hands or questions from my colleagues? Oh, Commissioner Rectal?
Yeah, this agrees with my thinking. I am happy to move this.
Sorry.
Second.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I think this will simplify the process and for electrification, and I think it's consistent with at least what I was thinking for the noise. So
Commissioner Templeton?
I noticed the language about flats and foothills is still here. Is that intentionally retained?
If the commission has different language, we could either try to memorialize it here or think of something better between now and the time this goes to council.
Yeah, I think it's confusing. I think you're trying to match the quiet suburb level on the decibel chart to the lowest limit of urban ambient sound on the decibel chart. So
could we say suburban and rural?
I think that would be better. And I would also caution you to let you know that Barron Park considers itself rural.
No, I agree with that.
Commissioner, well, first I'd like to ask the seconder if she would like to speak.
Yes, I would like to speak. So I seconded this motion because I think it limits the changes to specifically further the goals of electrification rather than, which I think is what City Council asked us to look at and why we're being asked to look at Title IX, or why Director Late wanted us to apply on Title IX, and limits the effects of the change on the sound ordinance to the goal of electrification. So I didn't really want to broaden the impact beyond that. And I think that these changes that we're trying to put in place tonight now do that. So that's why I support this motion. I do agree that we should change the language from hills and flats to something else, but I don't know. I don't have a particular opinion as to what that should be.
Well, there's a new description already.
Which already sounds better to me.
So I don't know if it might make more sense to go by zone, but at least this gives some flexibility to people. So maybe it's better than by zone. Let's see. I have Commissioner Liu and then Commissioner Aiken and then Commissioner Templeton.
I actually need a second, so please skip me.
Okay. Commissioner Aiken.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that rather than trying to characterize the areas, you simply label them the 40 dBA zone and the 50 dBA zone. You have to define those eventually by a map anyway, right? And you might conceivably in the future want to have additional zones. So why try and overcharacterize them and just pick the numbers?
Yeah, I'm not wedded to any particular terminology. So if
40 dBA.
So there is no longer a 40 dBA zone or a 50 dBA zone.
Right.
And previously they were just defined as, the foothills is the 40 dBA zone and the flats are the 50 dBA zone. So
yeah,
to the extent you want to differentiate, we'll need some sort of location-based.
Yes, that has to be done. There has to be a map. It's just a matter of terminology.
Yeah, so the hills or the rural hillside will be the 40 dB zone on the map, and the suburban area will be the 50 dB zone. But we have to produce that map.
Yeah, and if you had a survey that justified changes, then you simply change the map. The ordinance stays the same.
And I don't think hillside is required to define the rural area.
We're not going to use that terminology. We're going to use the 40 and the 50.
Okay, if you replace that, I'm not going to support this motion.
Okay, well then you guys decide it's your motion.
Yeah, exactly. We can discuss it. That's fine.
The quiet area is more rural. That's why it's quiet. And the suburban area is more noisy. So I think calling rural and suburban would be sufficient. But to me, if you call it zone A and zone B, I'm happy with that. To me, this is a semantic issue and not a policy issue.
I actually really like that. Let's call it zone A and zone B. And then draw the map to make zone A and zone B.
Well, as a counterpoint, what's helpful about having rural and suburban is that they're the canonical examples of 50 and 40 in the decibel chart.
I would like to get your support, Commissioner Templeton, so whatever makes you happy. So you would prefer rural and suburban, is that correct?
I would like it to say the rural area and the suburban area. Thank you.
Okay, let's do that. Rural and suburban then. We're kind of doing this on the fly, so I don't know if we have to be formal. So Commissioner Rechtel, do you agree as the maker?
I am happy with that.
Okay, I agree as the seconder.
Okay, Commissioner Hagman?
So I'm wondering if we can, I don't, if I got on my bike right now, I don't know if I know I'm starting in the suburban area, but as I rode toward and past 280, I don't think I'd be able to tell you when I entered the rural area. I'm wondering if our zoning can help us with this, because I would expect, well, I really haven't studied it, but I would expect as we reach the city's edges, we get a less dense zoning.
Yeah, OS.
Well, right. I really haven't studied that, but I'm wondering if that's true.
We could also define them by the decibel levels.
Well, then we have to measure everything.
I mean,
forever. So
does it help? Sorry if I can
I'm trying to find out about our zoning.
Yes.
Like,
would it help to say open space and residential estates zones
well,
because we're talking about residential zones and open space is not technically a residential zone. It's open space zone.
Right, but you can have a house
homes up there. Yes.
Right. And so is that help? I'm trying to effectuate what staff had in mind when they came up with, what came to us tonight. And is that consistent with it or not? Because I don't know. I haven't looked at a map to see where your residential estate zoning is, ours or open space. Is it?
Yeah, if you look at a map of Palo Alto, you have kind of this cherry stem, and then you have a cherry over here, and then you have the rest of the area. So if you wanted to just say that as a starting point, and then say, well, no, it needs to be different than that, I guess.
Okay, so to me, the intention, though it wasn't written that way, was RE and OS. To me, that was the intention. But I have a question. Why do they need, do those two zones need the same table for setbacks? Because they're such larger properties?
Yes. For instance, open space zone has a 30-foot setback for the home,
Right. So, I mean,
very
I'm wondering if the table makes sense now, and I'm sorry to bring this up late, for RE and OS. Maybe it does.
I think it does. It all applies to how much noise are you putting on that property line, and that's independent of how big the lot is.
Right. This table doesn't independently allow you to put equipment in a particular place, right? It's really a limit on what you might otherwise be allowed to do based on our basic setback rules, that you have to feather back from the property line as the loudness of the equipment increases. Right? Is that right?
Yes, it's getting greater setbacks the louder you get.
Right. So just because this table, the new table starts at 3 feet, doesn't mean if my non-electrification equipment is quiet, I can't automatically put it at 3 feet. right? Because this table only applies, we're making this table only apply to electrification equipment.
That's the direction we're going. Yes.
Right, okay.
So I will say that I have a lot of hesitation about how this is going to work, but I know one thing that doesn't work now currently is our noise ordinance. Because, and this may make enforcement easier, I think, which has a benefit. And I mean, I'm tending towards supporting it. I think the staff's intention was to not increase the noise levels, but to give more flexibility for this equipment that the council has a strong interest in promoting. So, but if it ends up being problematic, I'm a little worried. But I think at this point, I think it's.
If it's problematic, you can change it. This is, any type of ordinance you can change if it doesn't work out.
Yeah. So I'm inclined at this point to support it despite sort of a hesitation, my neighbor, in my thought process, because I think it could make enforcement of the issue easier, to be honest. And I think that's helpful to neighbors. So I hope, and I think this is a good direction to give council, and they may find some nuances. And so I think if no one else.
Sure, I wasn't done.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So why don't you go ahead?
All right, thank you. So if we are eliminating the change to 9, 10, 20, that's the change that added the 50 dB concept. So now that's gone. Then when I look at item 2, which is of the motion that's on the in front of us, which is the new language for 9, 10, 30. We have that 50 dB. So again, when you take it out of 9, 10, 20, our standard citywide is 40, because that's what the current ordinance says. But here we're introducing 50. And so my concern is, if we're saying we want a higher standard for electrification equipment because it will encourage it, okay. But I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to know if my local ambient noise is greater or less than 50 rather than the standard 40 without a noise test every time, which is something I thought we were trying to avoid. So I'm looking for some guidance from staff on that. It's possible that we've just mushed this up so much in trying to address things that we got to step back and rethink this.
I guess if we get rid of the, presumed levels, we can also get rid of that second sentence because you'll just have whatever the limit is. The second sentence was meant to provide even more flexibility.
Right.
For those areas that were, particularly loud.
No, I think that's important. If you're loud and you want to go through the process, fine, we'll let you have higher noise.
So I guess we could instead have this language sort of say, as an alternative to table 1 for areas with local ambient noise greater than 50 decibels.
Would it work if instead of areas with local ambient noise greater than 50 decibels, we just said in the suburban area?
No. Because the suburban area is presumed to be at 50 or below. And so we're saying no matter where you are, if it's just really noisy, it's 60 because you're, right next to the Caltrain, you can have this electrification equipment.
But Mr. Young, have that presumption right now. If we've gotten rid of the 50 concept in 9, 10, 20, right, then we don't have, right? And so I really feel like, I feel like staff had a comprehensive approach coming in tonight. I think that the commission has really raised some good issues, but now I feel like in trying to fix it on the fly, I feel like it's too complicated to do that. And I'd like to move this to council, but I'm wondering if we're just going to send them a mess if we try to do it tonight, and what staff thinks about having heard all this, whether they want to look at this and bring it back to us at the next meeting. I don't usually like to put these things off. I have a pretty good record of that, but tonight I'm worried about a bad product going to council.
I mean, I think this is better than what came in tonight, because before we were having a really big change by changing all sound issues. This is really focused to, we are changing the setbacks and allowing equipment in the setbacks, which has sound impacts. We're addressing these sound impacts. If council wants us to address sound as a whole, that's a big discussion. And I think that would require more input. This, I think, is a much cleaner, focused motion.
Yeah, I understand the change, Commissioner Rechtel, but the problem is when you look at the table, the setback table, which nobody's talking about changing any numbers of, the whole first column now doesn't apply if there's no 40-50 differentiation. And in fact, and the second column doesn't make any sense if there's no 50 base level, which we've wiped out of 9, 10, 20. And so, because we're starting at 53. And so that's what I'm saying is I think we have blurred
there
to the
there
point
will
where
be
we have to
eventually
look
a
at.
map. There will be a map that defines the rural area and the suburban areas that are in 0.3. Those are going to be defined.
We don't know
You
where
don't-
those are.
You don't need the baseline. I'm not quite sure what your question is, Commissioner Heckman, because all you need to know is where you live. Where you live defines which column you look at.
No.
You don't need to know the baseline. You don't need to know the ambient noise level. You don't need to know you don't need to know that it's a 50 decibel level column. We know that in creating the end user doesn't need to know what that curve was designed to do. The curve was designed to keep it at a 50 decibel level noise at the property line. The end user doesn't need to know that was the goal.
We are creating two new standards here, Vice Chair Chang, that don't exist in our code today. Some place that's called the rural area is actually going to be a perpetuation of our current code, which says that the maximum outside noise is 40, right? Because that's what that first column is keyed to, 40 dB at the property line, right? That's what it's keyed to. But the second
only
column,
for
the middle one,
electrification equipment.
Right. So electrification equipment in this thing that is called the rural area, which we don't know where it is, but we can kind of guess. That's going to basically dovetail with our current code as written today, which allows 40 dB throughout the city.
The 40 dB doesn't impact anywhere else in the city as currently written.
No,
that's
read the code. Read the code, the definition of local ambient.
No,
right?
That's why
it's
item number 1 in the motion.
Interior, it's 30 interior and 40 outside.
The first point in the motion says to remove all changes to PAMC 9.10.0.
Exactly. Now go look at that code and you'll see that the only change is the underlined area. So when you remove
I see what you're saying.
It's
okay.
40. 40 is the city threshold today. All right. And I'm fine. If we're not going to change that, I'm not objecting. But then if you look at the second column of the table, that's keyed to a 50 dB threshold that we don't have anywhere in the city. It was proposed by staff to be in was called the flats or the urban area. But now we've taken out the language of 50.
I assume that the motion changes we had implied that this table would be updated to match. Are you saying that's not implied?
I'm saying that the table gets collapsed into one column if we're going to do that. And it's the first column, unless our intention is as part of trying to promote electrification, we give them a separate higher dB level of 50, which is.
No, we anticipate the motion says to continue the use of this table. We're not collapsing it into one.
Exactly.
Right, but
So-
it doesn't matter if it's keyed off of this or not.
So,
in other words, the electrification, the 40 in the first column is coincidentally the same as the 40 in the local ambient definition.
I agree. It's the middle column that becomes a problem because now, despite a citywide limit of 40 dB for electrification equipment only, I can have 53 dB 4 feet from the property line, which gets me 50 dB at the property line, which is 10 dB higher than anything else in the city under the current ordinance, which, as our noise consultant pointed out, is a doubling of the sound. And if that's our intention, that's fine, but I think we need to recognize it. And I think
that is our intention, though.
Double the noise allowed for electrification equipment only.
I think it's.
Well, it's
40
not
dB,
quite.
10.
It's not
It could be
quite
6
doubling.
over ambient.
Right. So to be clear, as Director Late explained earlier, it doesn't actually double what is currently allowed. It's equivalent to what is currently allowed, because currently you're allowed to, in 91030A,
No, you
increase
can't.
the level more than 6 decibels above local ambient. So 6
Right.
decibels above local ambient is already increasing it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So effectively putting it to 53, 4 feet from the property line is the same as 6 above local ambient. So the table just actualizes what is currently allowed. It just puts it into numbers.
So then what does the first column do?
The first column translates it into numbers for a quieter area.
Okay. So you're saying that maybe it's 33, 34 in those areas, you could get your 6, which takes you almost to 40.
Correct.
Okay, and in the urban areas, it's maybe 43.
Correct.
And that takes you to 49, 50.
At least that's based on my understanding from what our consultant said and what Director Lake was saying. Yes.
So then we never have to write the number 50.
Correct.
Okay, which is why Mr. Yang has taken it out of point 2 of the motion.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why I think it doesn't present an issue, but I'm glad that you are asking about this.
Okay, and then what are we doing? I'm looking at let's see, the language after where heat pump was in C1, is that language now gone? Which said electrification equipment in areas measured local ambient noise over 50 dBA shall be subject to generally applicable noise standards.
Yes, that had been replaced with the language that's shown now in strikeout, and it's currently replaced with language that starts as an alternative to compliance with table 1.
Okay. Got it. All right, so this goes away. Huh. Pretty complicated. All right, Vice Chair Chang, thank you for walking me through that and straightening my head.
Well, I'm glad you're asking about it because I think it's really important that we don't do something like exactly what you were saying. So I'm really glad you asked. Yeah.
We're keeping this language, right? Or do we?
Yeah, no, this is the new language, which is not going to be there anymore. It's just the stuff that with the 2 lines. This is our current ordinance.
I know.
Yeah, it's just the stuff that with the double underline they were going to put in, now they're not.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to add to this very interesting dialogue, and I wish we'd had been able to have this before the motion was in place. But just to let you know, the table that we're referring to, that we've been told is representative of degrading the sound by the property line. I'm not usually very skeptical of the data that we get from staff, but this one is just a little concerning to me. The data table that I'm looking at for decibels uses as its example for 40 and 50, we agree that these are the right examples. We talked about quiet suburb and rural environment. This says that air conditioning units at 100 feet are 60 decibels, and possibly this data is really old, but 100 feet, and what our table says is at 10 feet, it'll degrade down to 50. And those numbers don't match. And I'm bringing this up because this is kind of this skeptical approach that I have about, I don't really accept that I'm understanding this table the way it's been explained to me. And I'm finding different information at engineering schools that study this kind of stuff. So just wanted to throw that out there. So we have here at a 50 dBA limit table, column 2 there, at 60 decibel air conditioning unit will degrade in 10 feet down to 50. So that's halving its sound, whereas at 100 feet, and anonymous, we don't know what air conditioning unit, maybe it's a window unit, they are louder, maybe it's an older model, they are louder, but at 100 feet, it was 60 decibels. So are you sure that we've explained what column 3 means, that it'll go back down to 50 decibel by the property line?
Yeah, so I'm not an acoustical engineer.
Neither, it's
so
fine.
let's invite our consultant who can speak to how sound degrades over distance.
Well, first I want to make sure that's what you meant, and then we'll get him to check. That's our collective understanding at this point, is that that's what column 3 is that it's back down to 50 by the property line.
So again, it's my understanding.
Okay, so let's get our engineer to help us understand what this column means so that we're all on the same page.
Yes, the columns that are in the table are basically an applicant or somebody who wants to put in this equipment would bring their manufacturer's noise data for the equipment to the planning staff. And there would be a rating on that equipment. They would use that rating and this table to determine what the minimum setback would be required. These calculations are made assuming hemispherical spreading losses from a point source. They're very basic generic calculations.
So what I'm saying is sorry to interrupt. We definitely don't need to get to that level of detail, but what I'm trying to figure out, what's the difference between, if an air conditioning unit is 60 decibels at 100 feet, why does our chart say it's going to be 60 decibels at 10 feet?
That whatever you're looking at, which I don't have the opportunity to look at, but there's a wide variety of air conditioning systems. We're talking about pretty small residential.
Right, but decibel degradation would be consistent throughout the physical universe.
Well, that's correct, but the noise output of a much larger air handling system is going to be much greater than that of a small one.
Right. Okay. Okay, that's all. We don't have to get into it. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear that what that column is supposed to mean, and that there may be, we don't know how that's going to play out. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments, or can we vote? Not seeing any, so could you conduct the vote?
Oh, one question for Albert. Is this attachment A Is that the in places memo or is that the original?
It's the original, but point 4 of the motion incorporates the changes from the memo.
Oh, perfect. I'm sorry. Yep, that's what I wanted. Thank you.
Okay, everybody ready? Okay, please conduct the vote.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Hackman,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Commissioner Rekdal,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
Yes,
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
thank you very much. Okay, we just have, thank you, everyone. And we just have a couple of sets of minutes now to approve. So draft summary minutes from July 12th, 2023. Do I have a motion and a second? You are absent. Motion, please.
I move that we accept the minutes.
Okay. Second? I'll second. Could you call the vote, please?
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Wait, I'm trying to figure out if I was there for this one or not.
Why don't you just go to the next person while Commissioner?
okay. Commissioner Hackman,
Abstain.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Commissioner Rekdal,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang, I think you were there. This was
Yeah.
the discussion.
Yes, I was,
of
yeah, I was,
Ellsworth.
yeah, yes, I was there. So yes.
Okay.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. The next one is the verbatim and summary minutes from July 26.
Move approval as revised.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Can we vote, please?
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Hackman,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Abstain.
Commissioner Rekdal,
Yes.
Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you so much. Now, do we have any comments or questions or observations from anyone?
I'm gonna just echo what you said at the beginning. I think some of the reason tonight went 3 hours instead of 1 is that there was some new things to think through and maybe just to echo Chair Suma's points that that'd be best to minimize this. But as Mr. Heckman said, we don't do it very often, so.
I just have one question. Is the HIP going to be part of what we review in our future meetings under the zone? Zone changes we'll be looking at to accommodate the housing element.
There's gonna be eventually, I can't offhand say what all is wrapped into the one we're gonna see next.
Okay.
So, you'll be the first to know
Okay.
when HIP is on the
I just
agenda.
thought I'd check because we
Yeah.
talked about it. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, meeting is adjourned.
Oh, I have
Thank
a
you.
question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just want to quickly check, is there any update on how we're thinking about resubmitting the housing element or any planned timelines?
We are working on a response to the latest, the most recent 90-day comment letter. So there's quite a bit of work. So wish us luck.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.